The Jail Finishing School for Ladies, Etiquette for Dangerous Women, by Jaime Hope McArdle, read by the author. Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg, and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him, and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him, and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. Judges 4:21-22. Prologue. During the time Deborah was judge of Israel, the people had turned from God and were cruelly oppressed by King Jabin for 20 years. Deborah would sit under a palm tree where people would come to her for judgment. One day the God of Israel spoke to Deborah and told her it was time to overthrow the oppressive reign of Jabin. She sent for Barak and instructed him to gather his men, draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, and God would ensure his victory. Barak said he would do this, but only if Deborah would accompany him into battle. She agreed, but told Barak that because of this request, the glory of the conquest would not go to him. Instead, Sisera would be delivered into the hands of a woman. The men of Israel marched to draw out Sisera and the army of King Jabin, and God went before his people and routed the great army and all his chariots by the sword. But Sisera escaped the battle on foot, and seeking a place to hide, found himself at the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. There had been peace between King Jabin and Heber, so Sisera felt safe there. Jael beckoned Sisera into the tent, gave him a skin of milk to refresh him, and hid him under a rug. He instructed her to keep watch for him while he rested, but instead of obeying Sisera, the general of her people's oppressor, she took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand, and softly went to Sisera, and drove the tent peg into his temple until it went down to the ground while he slept, and so he died. Jael then went out and found Barak, who was pursuing Sisera, and said to him, "Come, I will show you the man whom you are seeking," and led him to where Sisera lay dead with the tent peg in his temple. So on that day God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel, who had harshly oppressed them for 20 years. And the people of Israel continued to press harder and harder against Jabin until they destroyed his reign and won their freedom. Introduction. This story, like much of the Bible, isn't for the faint of heart. There's so much to unearth about women and the complex role we are called to. First thing to consider is, it was during the time Deborah was judge of Israel. To understand this era, we will need some backstory. This is the era of judges. Almost everyone has heard the story of Moses, the plagues on Egypt, let my people go, the 10 Commandments, the burning bush. If you missed the stories in Sunday school, they've worked their way into popular culture and movies enough to be familiar with at least on some level. To fill in some gaps, God's chosen people, when it was really just a large family, were living out a widespread famine in Egypt way, way, way back. At the time, they were a great help to Pharaoh because God had given a heads up to one of his people, Joseph, that the famine was coming with enough lead time to prepare. Egypt had enough food to thrive in a desperate time, and Joseph, son of Jacob, ended up the equivalent of the prime minister of Egypt. The people God brought there were successful, and they grew into a nation within a nation. However, over time, new leaders came to power that forgot how those people of God, the nation of Israel, or what we today call the Jews, had saved the country and made it rich. They grew fearful of their success and numbers and began to turn against them. Over time, the Jews became slaves in Egypt, but God did not forget them. In fact, much like Joseph's personal enslavement story, they continued to have God's favor, and the nation of Israel grew even in oppression. This made the rulers of Egypt devise a plan to kill all the boys who were born for a time in order to control the population. There was one woman in particular who had the courage to hide her little son and then take him to the Nile River and set him afloat in a basket in the hope that
Sample complete. Ready to continue?